I will say as a Palestinian American, I feel like it's in my blood. It's in my DNA, this fight against oppression. The idea is if this crime, which was so clearly a hate crime, a triple homicide and execution style murders, if this was not labeled a hate crime, then the real question is how many others are slipping through the cracks?
Can you just talk about the storytelling choices in 36 seconds? I mean, I found it riveting, and the footage of Hicks, demeanor immediately after the killing, and almost jovial interaction with the police.
For God's sake, the last thing that we have recorded from the police department is a police officer, an investigator saying, "Hey man, I wish you the best of luck." This is a guy who just executed 3 individuals.
Hello and welcome to the Muslim Viewpoint, a new video podcast powered by American Muslim Today, the national non-profit media platform. I'm your host, Rifat Malik. Today, we're joined by Tarek Albaba, a LA-based filmmaker whose work has been featured on National Geographic, the History Channel, Discovery, and Apple TV. I spoke to him earlier about his debut feature documentary, 36 Seconds, Portrait of a Hate Crime, which premiered at the DOC NYC in 2023, where it won the Subject Matter Award. The film concerns the infamous and brutal slaying of 3 young American Muslim students, Dia Barakat, Yusra, and Razan Abu Salah, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in 2015. So thank you so much for joining us today, Tarek. 36 Seconds explores the devastating consequences of a hate crime that shook the nation and became infamous internationally. Can you just tell us what that time frame refers to, and what is the essence of the film that you've directed and helped bring out?
Thank you so much for having me. I think the time frame is really interesting and an integral part of this film, because in 2015 something was in the air socially and politically. We were seeing an increase of far right kind of hate speech and mobilization. And so when the crime happened, it was shocking, but as a Muslim American who grew up in the South, I felt like something like this was inevitable. And when it did happen, I realized that through, my family and cousins who lived in the area, that they actually knew the victims. So it became very personal because I saw what my cousins were dealing with and grieving, and they were just so incredibly hurt. I think also seeing the trajectory of, how the media and law enforcement referred to this crime as a parking dispute, and this uphill battle to get the Department of Justice and the FBI to kind of take it seriously and look into it, as the family was trying to navigate this very complex system. You see things are kind of turning for the worst. Then presidential nominee Trump was announcing, that he was going to run. He was talking about a Muslim ban. He was using very specific Islamophobic rhetoric to help gain his popularity and kind of tap into that base. So again, walking a mile in the victim's family's shoes as you're trying to grieve and move forward and advocate for your tremendous loss. You're turning on the news and you're seeing this guy pick up momentum and eventually win. And then, it gets out of control, as you saw in the film. There was absolutely a sharp increase in hate crimes, and specifically to the Muslim American and Arab American population. And so that is the background. That is the unfortunate background and framing of the film. But I tried to kind of stay focused on these family members, their journey, and eventually getting some form of justice by getting the truth out and getting it on record, in 2019.
And obviously, and I think the film finally came out at the end of 2023. So tell us about that journey with the family through this period of, racial and religious Muslim rhetoric that we had, particularly with, as you say, the election of Donald Trump the first time. What kind of impact did that have on the family who are dealing with this incredibly horrific personal loss? And at the same time, the sympathy for them and what happened to their children just obviously wasn't there because of the climate.
I will say that, again, we're talking about two separate families with, different points of views and different ways that they were kind of grieving and their level of activism. And I will say for, the Abu Salha family, they had family members remove the hijab, because they were afraid of what might happen to them. I think Dr. Abu Salha, was afraid for his family. So, tying this story to the bigger political picture was a touchy subject, but it was also the gigantic elephant in the room that we had to talk about because we as a community were feeling the backlash and the rise of hate and Islamophobic rhetoric. And then others, like from the Barakat side, Dr. Suzanne was, she had more of an edge, and she was, calling this an act of terrorism and not mincing her words. She was, very vocal about these things. So I think, again, because it was two different families dealing with it in very different ways, collectively, as I was, on this journey telling this story, I tried to, again, stay focused on what they were dealing with in their daily lives and the updates with, what the FBI was saying. And we actually found out pretty early on that this was not going to be a hate crime, through our internal conversations and stuff that a lot of things were not public yet because they didn't see their day in court yet. But that doesn't mean that the fight to reclaim the narrative goes away. And that was the big picture thing. And I think that once they got new attorneys involved, Satana DeBerry and Assistant District Attorney Kendra Montgomery Blinn, they were advocates for the families in such a huge way. And they were like, look, we can't necessarily do anything about the hate crime on a state level or the federal level. But what we could do is we can get the truth out there through factual evidence. We can get this on record, and it matters to do that. So I think in the end, it was a win in terms of reclaiming the narrative. It was still very disappointing that, the idea is if this crime, which was so clearly a hate crime, a triple homicide and execution style murders, if this was not labeled a hate crime, then the real question is how many others are slipping through the cracks?
Yeah. Can you just talk about the storytelling choices in 36 seconds? I mean, I found it riveting, and the footage of Hicks, demeanor immediately after the killing and almost jovial interaction with the police. That was surreal, I thought. And you kind of build up to exposing Hicks' central lie about what happened on that fateful day. How did you decide on the narrative structure and the visual approach to, telling this really powerful story?
That's a great question. So I think structurally, we wanted to go for the widest audience possible. And sometimes with social issue documentaries, they tend to be a specific demographic that you're targeting. But I knew from my market research and also working in the industry for 20 years that, true crime documentaries are very popular. You're able to bring so many people into the fold. So I wanted to have, this foundation of a true crime story. And it wasn't your typical whodunit, right? Because he turned himself in the same night. So it was a whydunit, which I haven't seen actually in a lot of the documentaries that have been out. So through this true crime kind of foundation of why did he do it? What was the motive? We were able to kind of unpack and dig, take a deep dive into these bigger issues like bias in the media, Islamophobia, the complexity of hate crime prosecution. I think from a stylistic point of view, my cinematographer and I, anything that we shot, we wanted it to have that kind of premium look and feel. We also did recreations with actors and a stunt coordinator. We wanted to elevate it so that it wasn't just a documentary. It would feel like a cinematic experience. And post-production, we really pushed the envelope in terms of, how we were cutting, when we would kind of drop the music out completely. So you just had to be physically uncomfortable and sit there with the victims' families. It was incredibly hard. It took many, many years, many different iterations. And then I actually really fought with my co-executive producer. I say fought, but I pushed to include a lot of those moments with Hicks, because again, being a person of color, being an Arab American, Muslim American growing up in the South, I felt, and a lot of people in our community felt, that the way that he was treated, the fact that they weren't really pushing hard questions, they were just kind of taking his story, his narrative at face value, that really did not sit well with us. And I would challenge my co-executive producer on, what if the tables were turned, right? Like, what if this was a guy named Muhammad who just killed 3 white individuals? What would have transpired then? If it was an African American guy, and he would push back and say, well, we need somebody we need an expert to unpack that, and we need to show X, Y, and Z, and it just really won't work in our format. And I kind of just pulled the director card and said, no, this is important to me. Let's have the audience decide for themselves. Let's show the interactions. And I mean, for God's sake, the last thing that we have recorded from the police department is a police officer, an investigator saying, hey man, I wish you the best of luck. This is a guy who just executed 3 individuals. Now, some can argue that that was a tactic, playing buddy so that they could, continue to feel comfortable. It doesn't. And my thing is, that's after the confession, and that's after 2.5 hours to 3 hours of being in that booking room. So they already got the confession in the bag. They got what they needed after him. So now you're seeing a much more natural and relaxed atmosphere and conversation with the victim. And I just thought that was really telling. Why on earth would your departing words be to this guy, I wish you the best of luck, if you didn't sincerely mean it? So again, I left it up to the audience. I didn't try to commentate on that too much. I didn't want to bring experts to kind of unpack that, but I think the audience understood what we were trying to do, and they understood that there was absolute bias.
And I was just thinking, based on what you're saying as well, when you feel such an emotional connection to the subject matter of your film, and you share so many commonalities, as you say, your Arab American Muslim heritage, how does that impact, do you think, your storytelling capacity? And perhaps, could there be any, questions about journalistic integrity is not the right word, but, just your journalistic independence, perhaps, when you're trying to make a film of this nature, and about this particular subject?
Another great question. And we, thought about that early on. And look, the fact is the killer turned himself in. So there was no dispute over who killed these victims. So if that was a question, if there was, other potential, murderers out there, and this might be a case of you got the wrong guy. Okay, yeah, maybe I need to be a bit, more mindful of that quote unquote journalistic integrity. But for us, this was not only an investigation into what transpired, but this was an investigation into our own personal feelings. Because when this happened, I had that immediate knee-jerk reaction of, oh, something like this was inevitable. Oh, look how biased the media is. Look at them, continuing to talk about this as a parking dispute. I mean, the police officers, what is the common thing that you see? There's no comment. If it's within 24 hours and you haven't done a lick of investigating, say no comment. Keep a tight lid on it. They chose to put it out there and say, oh, based on our preliminary investigation, this is over a parking dispute. Yeah. Well, where did you get that information? They got it from the killer. That's pretty insane to me. So, for me, I felt like this was an opportunity to have an author, a filmmaker from the community, explore those feelings, to see if they're actually justified. That was my thing. It's like, are we crazy to have these feelings, right? Like, is it just me? Is it just my cousin who feels this way? What's the validity here? right? And so I feel like we did a good job in the film to, include experts, to talk to the media, to talk to journalists like from the New Yorker, and to have civil rights attorneys unpack it. And our intuition was correct. There was bias, there was Islamophobia that whether Hicks wants to admit it or not, that influenced what he did that night.
Yeah. Obviously, it's been a number of years while this film has been made, and as you say, you've at times had to work closely with the Barakat and the Abu Salah families. Can you give us an impression of them at the end of? I'm not saying it's the end of the journey, because obviously their pain is never going to go, and I guess the campaign for, justice and recognition for hate crimes is also it's going to be a long-standing battle. But can you just give us an impression of them and how you felt that they have come on this journey and where they are, now? I know Susan Barakat has been very vocal, as you say, she's been out there campaigning, but I imagine it takes a toll, and I just wonder what your impression of them is and how they are handling where they are now.
It's really tough. Like I still to this day, I can't imagine how they feel and how they cope. And I know that both families are very religious and in tune with their faith. And so questioning, this idea of why God would take them in such a brutal way, like that this certainly tested their faith, but they stuck to it, and they believed that it was for a reason that, that is beyond their control and their capacity. And look how many millions of people around the world have been moved by Dia Yus and Razan, and how they lived their life and how they woke up every single day thinking of others. They were so selfless. They were so fun. They were so cool. Even right now in this interview, this is evidence that that maybe there was, this idea that they were specifically chosen and to move the world and to change hearts and minds. That being said, there's Dr. Abu Salah and his wife, they're still parents. They're still parents that miss their kids, and they, they're seeing what's happening out there in the world. They're seeing the divisiveness, and there is some fear there, I believe, in terms of, keeping a lower profile, trying to live your life in peace. And then, on the other side with Dr. Suzanne, she's kind of doubling down in a way, and speaking out and making sure that people know about this story. And the organization, which she's the board chair of, R3 Winners Foundation, they've been, a partner on this journey for the documentary, and helping sponsor events and doing panel discussions. And, I know for both families, this was incredibly hard for them to be a part of, but they understood the motivation. They understood my approach was going to be very different from other folks who weren't from the community. They trusted me with the story, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And together we got this out. And I think that they're really proud of the work. They think it's honest. They think it's authentic. And it needed to be told, and it needed to be told in this way.
As you've said, the film clearly explores the underlying issues of racial and religious intolerance in America. And we are where we are right now. What does it say about our country when we have just re-elected Donald Trump, undoubtedly a very divisive figure, who has blatantly used race baiting and anti-Islamic sentiment, in his campaign strategy? Obviously the first time, but even obviously the second time as well. As a filmmaker, as an American, what do you feel about? It's almost like coming full circle back to that same Trump part two.
You working on a project like this, when you start it so many years ago, you would hope at the end of the run, and when it finally gets out there, that the world is a safer and better place. Mm-hmm. It's quite unfortunate, actually, that the film is more timely and relevant than ever before. I'm thankful that there's buzz. I'm thankful that people are seeing it. I'm thankful that people are moved by it. But as a parent, it's terrifying, and it's depressing. And I think that we need to be careful. I have 2 young kids. I have a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I need to, make sure that they understand the kind of world that we're living in, but I also need to shield them in a certain way. But I think it's this idea that there's a lot of work to do. We need to continue to roll up our sleeves. We need to share our stories. We need to challenge. We need to resist. And I will say, as a Palestinian American, I feel like it's in my blood. It's in my DNA. This fight against oppression, this fight against trying to put a muzzle over our mouth. It just won't work. We're stubborn, we're intelligent, we're courageous, and we will continue to fight.
Just final question. So your film really has resonated deeply with audiences, won several awards. What does this recognition mean for the film's reach? And I'm talking about literally, are you able to get it out there? How are you getting it out there? And even your journey as a filmmaker.
So, I will be honest, I had this tunnel vision, of trying to get it to like Netflix or HBO. I really value their documentaries, the premium quality, the reach, the audience. And we were actually kind of in talks with Netflix for a couple of years leading up to the completion. And they actually really loved it. HBO really liked the film too. So, they both passed, and it seemed to be more of a programming issue, whatever that means. But we had to pivot, and you can't just cry about it. You continue to push. And I will say, thankfully, that we have international distribution with TRT World. It's going to be broadcast in, I believe, over 100 countries. It's going to be on their website. The part 1, they're dividing it into a 2-part series. Part 1 is actually going to be released this Sunday, and then part 2 the following Sunday, I believe. We're going to make a post about that soon. And I'm not sure when this is going to be aired, but I think I'll be okay to say that we did secure domestic distribution with PBS on a series called Real South. And we have an air date of April 7th. So between the international distribution with TRT World, domestic distribution with PBS, and also we have a UK company called Journeyman Pictures. They are representing the film on the video on demand. So right now, actually, you could tell your subscribers and folks, please share that it is available. It's on Apple TV. It's on Canopy. It's also on Vimeo and YouTube for rent, or you could buy the film. So please share it. I mean, I think that that's one of the biggest things that our audience members can do. People always ask, is there a certain bill that I could push? Is there, I think a huge part of activism is storytelling. And invite some people over, watch the film, have some discourse, and don't just invite Muslims, right? Like, we don't want to get stuck in the echo chamber.
Yeah.
Invite your neighbors, invite your classmates, invite your coworkers, and have a real discussion afterwards. I mean, I think this film, you certainly need a breather when the credits roll, but it's one of those films that forces discourse, because I believe that we told the story through a human lens.
Well, you absolutely did. Thank you so much for joining us, Tarek. It's an extraordinarily powerful film, and I really think that you've honored the memory of these 3 young lives that were so brutally cut short. So thank you so much for making this film and for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's all for this episode of Muslim Viewpoint. If you value our public service journalism, please support American Muslim Today, a 501c3 nonprofit, by following us on social media at American Muslim Today or donating at americanmuslimtoday.com. And before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'm Rifat Malik.